Hello YouTubers, and welcome to another episode of TamiyaTruckBuilding. I'm Colin, and this is part 11 of the Volvo FH12 build. Perhaps this is the stage of the build that novices have the most difficulty with, the gearbox. I'm going to show you that despite its complexity, it isn't as bad a build as you may think. Stage 19 is relatively straightforward. There are two end plates. They do differ very slightly, so make sure you identify which is A and which is B. And what you could do is what I've done, which is just to mark A and the back. And in this particular section, all we're going to be doing is attaching 3 of the connection rods that hold the front and the rear parts of the gearbox together with screws. No thread lock needed. We're not putting the 4th one in just yet. The 4th one goes in right at the end. That allows room for you to be able to put the actual gearbox parts in. There are plastic inserts that go in, and they're a push fit. This particular one is held in place with 2 little screws and 2 nuts that require thread lock. A bearing will go in there afterwards, and that'll form the place that holds one of the shafts. Pop a little bit of thread lock on the back. 2mm nuts, and there are recesses in the back of the plastic that hold them in place. And the good old JIS screwdriver, number 2. Despite its size, is surprisingly good on very small screws. You'll notice I marked A inside on that plate because it would be so easy to put it on the wrong way around, and then you'll have to take them all off and do it again. Okay, there's a couple of pieces in place. Now the other 2 rods. Held on by 3mm by 6mm screws. As always, it's worth checking the diagram to make sure you're putting these on in the right place, because it is possible that you can put them in the wrong holes. So there's our 3 connecting rods in place. What's left to do now in this stage is to mount a small pin with 2 nuts. What this is going to be the guide pin for the gear selector There'll be another part that will slide over this later on in the build, and it allows the servo to push the selector rod backwards and forwards in a straight line. One nut goes on the rod before it's inserted into the front. Note the hole that goes in, not the one with a little bush in it, but the hole to the right of it, because the one that's got that little copper coloured bush in it is where the selector rod is going to go. Once this is done up, that will complete section 19. This is stage 20. There are two driven shafts in the gearbox, gear shaft A and gear shaft B. In this section we'll be building gear shaft A, and it's important to note the difference between the two shafts. They are totally different, so just have a look at the diagram and make sure that you pick up the right one. Sort out the parts you need for it. A little tip, Colin tip, is the plastic gear cogs, of which there are 5, I believe. Just mark them up on the back with numbers 1 to 5 so they're easy to identify. How do you identify them? If you go to the back of the book, you will find under the J section there's a very nice full-scale picture of each of the cogs, save you having to count the teeth or anything like that. You can probably see in the picture here that the yellowy coloured cog has actually got 2 black dots on it. Anyway, I've started to put the shaft together. The first thing that I've done is fitted 2 circlips, 2 2mm circlips, and now there are 2 metal cogs that go on. Note with that second metal cog, the one that I've just put on, that it goes on with like a small collar facing outwards. It then shows this gear wheel, which is G2, going over the top of that metal cog. Quite honestly, it'll only go on one way round. Try to put it on the other way, it won't go. Put the cog in position, and then you've got to put another one of them lovely little 2mm clips on the outside. I'm sorry I've got my hand in the way. I'll try and show you in a minute if I can get it anywhere near where it needs to go. Clearly this isn't one you could press down on the paper. You're going to need to use some pliers to do this. I'm going for a pair of long nose pliers. It's always good fun. Sometimes 3 hands would be helpful. Get it where you want and a quick squeeze and click into place. Be patient with these things, they're not easy to do. That little cog on the back. And what the diagram tells you to do now is to turn it round the other way, because we now need to fit some parts on the end of the shaft that's facing the camera. On here is gear number 1, you'll notice the 1 spot I've put on it. And there is another one of those collars, and again note that there's like a little bit of a rib on the end of it, and that faces inwards. Another one of my favourite 2mm clips. Get it in a minute. There we go. There we go. Sometimes a big pair of pliers does that quite easily. Sometimes they bounce around the room. Fortunately, they give you a few spares. Last 3 parts to go on now. Central collar, G1 gear wheel, and another 2mm clip on the outside. And that will complete stage 20. This is stage 21 and we're going to complete gear shaft B. This is the more complex of the two. Quite a lot of parts on this. I would just respectfully suggest you study the diagram well and you just move through it part by part, starting at the top as the picture shows and then turning the shaft round as you go and completing the other end. Start with a circlip in the middle. This particular shaft has a number of moving parts, not just rotating but sliding backwards and forwards as moved by the selector forks. So there's going to be a fair bit of grease needs to be applied to it. So you're going to get your fingers wet, I'm afraid. Just going to pop a bit in the middle, because there is a bearing required to go either side of that circlet to start with. You'll note there's 2 different colours of bearings, and if you look at the pictures which I'm pointing to, one is slightly bigger than the other. Interestingly, look, that one, the dark one, I know you can't see, but it won't go all the way on. It's not the right one. The correct one to be putting on is the lighter coloured one, which is an ND7. Pop one of those on and it'll go right the way up to the circlip. There we go. Slide it backwards and forwards and just get the grease underneath it. Another one's to go on the other side as well. Just popping a touch more grease on there. It's important that there's plenty of grease on these shafts. Let's give the hands a quick wipe. On this end we have one of the selector units called J7. The diagram shows the way around to go. That is not the correct way around to put it. Despite the fact it fits, you'll notice that those long connections which fit into another gear wheel There you go, that's the right way around. Confucius say, check again. If you put it on the wrong way around, you're going to have to try and get all the circlips off and all sorts of things. Talking of circlips, or C-clips as they call them, little 2mm one to go on here. There we go. On the other end of the shaft goes G4 or gear 4. That can be identified by the number of dots you put on it, and of course you can compare it on the little diagram in the back of the book. Another MD7 bearing. And that's it. That's the start of your shaft. You can then spin it round. Another little circlip to go on. That allows the selector to move but not come off. Now there's a collar to go on, and you'll note that there's like a little ridge on the end of the collar which goes on the outside. Another 2mm circlip or C-clip to go on the outside. It then requires some grease for the next stage. Funny, you can put dozens of these on first time, and then sometimes you'll have one that pings around the room 3 or 4 times. They can be fun, the little small C-clips. Just lubricate that up because there will be another gear wheel going over the top of that one. What we're going to do now is on the centre of the centre diagram, stage 21, is build the parts on the back. Note that there's a washer goes on there first, that's most important. Then a collar, then another one of the selector forks. Sorry, not selector fork, selectors. The fork goes on the selectors. Now this one has one of the smaller bearings, the MA3s on the end of it. It's the darker coloured one. Then on goes gear wheel G5. Another one of the MA3 bearings, the darker coloured ones. And then don't forget this little plastic part off the sprue, J5, little white part, followed by another circle. Let's see if I can click this one on without it going around the room. Look at that, straight on. Just making sure all the parts move freely, which they do. And in the bottom of the three pictures, we don't turn it round this time. We need to put some parts on the end that's facing the camera. Which is this end. Pop a bit of grease on first because we've got another gear to go on here yet, and another selector. First off is J6 selector fork, not selector fork, sorry. Which slots into position. Note the way round it goes, look at the picture. Put it in the wrong way round, your gearbox won't work. MA3 bearing. Last of the cog wheels, the G3, another bearing, and the final circlip. And breathe easy that you've got no parts left. There we go. Gear shaft B complete. Moving on to stage 22. This one's relatively simple compared to the last two shafts. This is your selector fork and the three selectors. Sorry, I'll start again. The selector shaft and the three selector forks. This is what the servo uses to change the gears. Again, to study the diagram, a couple of 2mm clips to go in the middle to start with. Lots of grease on the shafts. So a pair of selector forks back to back on the one side and a single one on the right hand side furthest away from the camera. When you put the two, between the two, there's a little plastic collar, J1. Most important that you fit that. Have a look at the diagram. It just puts a little bit of distance between the two MD16 selector forks. Again, if you miss it out, you'll have great difficulty in selecting your gears properly. Last but not least, to go on here will be a spring, which you just have to carefully leave in place for the moment. It's not retained in any way. You'd always put a blob of grease on there or something to just keep it there, but just be mindful of the fact you've got it on there. In stage 23 we get to put all of our hard work together. So you're going to need the outer casing, which you put together in 19, another plastic bush to go in place to support the shafts, bearing has to go in there as well, which will need to be greased. Put your two gear shafts together as per the diagram, and your selector onto the selector forks. Touch fiddly, make sure the selector goes through that hole top right in the diagram. Slide all three parts into position, locating the two shafts into the bearing holes. Make sure you put the gearbox plate B on the correct way round. You'll notice that the selector fork has gone through the hole top right. Make sure those two springs have stayed in place. We're now ready to just put some screws in. You'll also be fitting the fourth connecting rod. And there we are. That is the gearbox complete. Just tightening up the screws. And the only thing we haven't done, and I don't do it frankly until this stage, is put the grease on the gear wheels, because once they're together you've got plenty of opportunity to just spin the gear wheels. Just make sure you put plenty of grease on each of the gears, as you can see, that touch each other, and including the big single gear top right now, which is where the motor cog connects to. Don't forget to put grease on the selectors. That's the opaque plastic pieces in the middle, of which there are 3. Spin them round. Sorry, I held the picture a little bit, held the unit a little bit too high there off camera. That's it. That is your gearbox complete. Well, I hope you enjoyed that and will now feel more confident to tackle the gearbox build on your own truck. Thanks for watching. In the next episode I'll mount the motor to the gearbox and fit it in the chassis. Don't forget to hit the like button, and if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel. Bye for now.